Madhava Kunjabi Adi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Madhava Kunjabi Hari Gopi Janam Bhalabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Bhalabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Bhalabha Girivardhari Girivardhari Vyasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Vyasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Dana Brajajanaranjana Jamna Tira Vanachadi Jamana Tira Vanachadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihadi Radha Madhava Kunjabihadi Jai Radha Madhava Kunjabihadi Radha Madhava Kunjabihadi Gopi Jana Bhalabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Bhalabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Bhalabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Bhalabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jana Brajajanaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachadi Jamuna Tira Vanachadi Jai Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Madhava Kunjabihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Astatarasatasi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Gaur Pimanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Canto 10, Chapter 50, starting with text 54. Sudharmam parijatam cha Mahendra prahino dhare Yat Yatra chavastito martyo martya dharmayarna yujate sudharma parijatam cha Mahendra prahino dhare Yatra chavastito martyo Martya dharmayarna yujate Dharmam parijatam cha Mahendra prahino dhare Yatra chavastito martyo Martya dharmayarna yujate. Ladies. Sudharmam parijatam cha Mahendra prarthanodhare Yatra chavastito martyo Martya dharmayarna yujate Sudharmam parijatam cha Mahendra adinodhare Yatra chavastito martyo Martya dharmayarna yujate Sudharmam, the Sudharma Assembly Hall. Parijatam, the Parijata tree. Cha, and Maha Indraha, Lord Indra, King of Heaven. Prahinot, delivered. Harehe, to Lord Krishna. Yatra, in which Sudharma, cha, and avastitaha, situated. Martyaha, a mortal. Martya dharmai, by the laws of mortality. Na yujate, is not affected. And the translation, Lord Indra brought Sri Krishna, the Sudharma Assembly Hall, standing within which a mortal man is not subject to the laws of mortality. Indra also gave the Parijata tree. Now we mentioned this yesterday. And let's hear what the commentary has to say, because there's a different account in a later chapter where the Parijata tree was given after a battle between Krishna and Indra. But here in chapter 50, no battle, he just gave. Martya Dharma is the law, Dharma, of mortality, Martya Dharma. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the residents of the heavenly realm don't die? Because anyone that stands within the Sudharma Assembly Hall is not subject to the laws of mortality. Is that we're supposed to understand? Yeah, that's not what we're supposed to understand. There's, for example, demigods are sometimes addressed as immortal. The Soma Rasa brings immortality, but it's not the absolute immortality, it's longevity. That's how to understand. Here's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, two short sentences. He established the Parijata tree there, Krishna. This is in the past tense in relation to Shukadev and Parikshit's conversation. Jiva Goswami writes, Indra brought the Parijata tree, or rather gave it up when Krishna took it, which is the later chapter when Krishna took it. Or, previous to that pastime, Krishna arranged for a variety of Parijatas, as described in verse 51, different from that stolen from Swarga. Different from that stolen from Swarga. That was in the later chapter when we mentioned yesterday. Krishna retrieved the stolen earrings of Aditi from Narakasura. Actually, it was the mother of Narakasura. After Narakasura was finished, she, the mother, came and brought the earrings and the other stolen items and gave them to Krishna. And then Krishna returned the earrings and other stolen items back to Indra, because that was Indra's request of Krishna. And while there, Satyabhama said, I want the Parijata tree. Indra said no. There was a battle. Krishna took from Swarga the Parijata tree. So there's different ways of understanding this contradiction. The word Hare indicates that Krishna took it by force. Indra did not willingly send it. But then he says, Jiva Goswami said, the Sudharma hall, however, was only one. So there's different Parijata trees, no problem. Different varieties of, let's say, maple trees or oak trees or any other trees. There are varieties. So some varieties were given, some varieties were not given. Krishna stole them. These, the later chapter. That's how Jiva Goswami has reconciled what it says in chapter 50, what it says in a later chapter. I forget the chapter number. So let's go to text 55. Lord Varuna offered horses as swift as the mind, some of which were pure dark blue, others white. The treasurer of the demigods Kuvera gave his 8 mystic treasures, and the rulers of various planets each presented their own opulences. BBT purport reads, Srila Sridhar Swami comments as follows on this verse, quote, the master of the treasury is Kuvera, and the 8 treasurers are his nidhis. No, it says nidhis. Maybe it means cities, but it says nidhis. These are described as follows. It gives the 8. The 8 mystic treasures are called Padma, Mahapadma, Matsyakurma, Audaka, Nila, Mukunda, and Shankha. So those are not siddhis, those are nidhis, and mystic treasures, 8 in number, and he gave them. Vishwanath writes, Kuvera is the Lord of treasure, Nidhi Pati. His treasures are, and he lists all 8 of them. This Nidhi, that Nidhi, this Nidhi, that Nidhi. The master of the directions, the masters of the directions. What's the masters of the directions? The northeast, southwest, and then 4 more, northeast, southeast, 8 directions. There's masters. In the description of the 5th canto, these are called Lokapalas. Right? Lokapalas? On top of Mount Sumeru, there's an abode of Brahma, and there's 8 other abodes indicating the presiding deities of the 8 directions and subdirections. Each of those persons, the Lokapalas, gave their own particular wealth or opulence. This is all like, their donation for building Dwarka. 56. The Supreme Lord, having come to the earth, O King, these demigods now offered him whatever powers of control he had previously delegated to them for the exercise of their particular authority. Makes sense. No BBT commentary. Here's what Vishwanath writes. By the power of Yogamaya potency, he brought the citizens of Mathura to Dwaraka. This is described in the Padma Purana Uttarakhanda, quote, while the residents of Mathura were in deep sleep, Janardana picked them up and placed them suddenly in Dwaraka. When they woke up, they saw they were sitting with wives and children in golden houses. Unquote. Padma Purana, Uttarakhanda. Paragraph. He consulted with Balaram saying, quote, you stay here for a short while, and by this strategy I will have someone kill him. Kill him means Jarasandha. No, Kaliyavana. I will have someone kill him. That someone is Muchukunda. I will have someone kill him. Our acharyas are really fantastic. Jiva Goswami writes, they, that's the demigods and the Lokapalas and other people, gave their powers to the Lord, who, for fun, gathered all his various powers for enjoying his pastimes. They gave their powers to the Lord, for he was Swami Bhagavan, who appeared on earth for his supreme pastimes. Shukadeva calls out enthusiastically to Parikshit, "O king!" One should see Harivangsha for an elaborate description of the making of Dwaraka. Now, it doesn't give the elaborate description from Harivangsha, and I don't have a copy. Well, I have a copy in my bookshelf. Maybe I'll find it for tomorrow. What's the class tomorrow? Tomorrow we're going to continue with, although it's Janmashtami, we can continue with text, chapter 50. Oh, that's right. That's right. So it's whatever he wants to do. Okay. So whenever Monday, no, I won't be here for Monday. Anyway, next time I give class. Tuesday. I'll search the Harivangsha and see what's the elaborate description of the making of Dwarka. Okay. Yeah, tomorrow's Janmashtami. Shoo. From Dwarka to Mathura. Instead of from Mathura to Dwarka. It's good to remember, because it's a fact, that the pastimes that are described in Srimad Bhagavatam have parallel descriptions in other authorized Vedic texts. And sometimes they simply fill in, sometimes they simply repeat, sometimes they describe things that are a little different than described in Srimad Bhagavatam. So it can cause some conflict in some people's minds, at least. How come it says this here and that there? The author is the same, it's Vyas. But it's not only within one literature and another literature, sometimes within Srimad Bhagavatam. Over here it says this, and over there it says that, and it sounds like it's mutually contradictory. Just like this example, how did the Parijata get to Earth? How did Parijata get to Dwarka, specifically? One says it's a gift, another says it was stolen. So there's different ways of understanding those things. One of the ways of understanding those things that doesn't work is speculation. Doesn't work. Maybe, perhaps, interesting, but it's not the path that we like to go. So our acharyas help us. In this case, it's one variety of parijata and another variety of parijata. And then there's another kind of explanation, often used explanation by our acharyas, that's different days of Brahma. We mentioned this yesterday. So something that's described over here is this day of Brahma, something over there is that day of Brahma, and they're not in contradiction because they're just different days of Brahma. What does that mean? It means when Krishna performs his pastimes, they're variegated. He's not bound to a cookie-cutter way of whenever he does his pastimes, it's got to be this. He's not bound. He does what he likes to do, and there's variety in what he likes to do. So generally, the explanation is there's a theme. And the theme generates rasa. That is, Krishna's enjoyment and Krishna reciprocating loving exchanges with his devotees. And sometimes those loving exchanges are like this. Sometimes those loving exchanges are like that. And within the this and the that, there's variety. And the variety is either different personalities at a different time, and they're exchanging loving dealings in a different way. And sometimes it's just Krishna's just enjoying, and so he's not bound to anything, so he just does things in a different way. And it's joyful. To the materialist or the empiricist, those that are, it's got to be, if it's this, it can't be that. If it's that, it can't be this. They're frustrated. And for those who are appreciating the unlimitedness of Krishna, it's wonderful. Full of wonder. So how do we understand when it looks like a contradiction? We look to our acharyas to hear their explanation. But their explanation even is not necessarily, it's bound to those explanations. In other words, sometimes one acharya says something different than another acharya, and it's quite okay. There's a classic example of this that's often referred to, at least in ISKCON circles. There's a verse from chapter 1 Bhagavad Gita, and I forget the verse number, but in Baladev commentary he says this, and Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur's commentary he says that. It has to do with the description of the armies that were assembled by the Kauravas. No, armies that were assembled by the Pandavas. One or the other. And one says it's unlimited and the other says it's limited. Same verse. And there, how close were Vishwanath and Baladev? Baladev was at Vishwanath's feet. And he writes something that's different, 180-degree different from what Vishwanath writes. Now, he's not impertinent. He's not insubordinate. He's not, to be criticized as faulty or disrespectful or some of those kind of things. He has a realization. And the realization corresponds with the Sanskrit. So he doesn't say something different than what Krishna says, or what the Bhagavad Gita says. In this case, it's Sanjaya speaking to Dhritarashtra, very early chapter 1. But he has a different realization. It is quite okay. So once you get that kind of wired, it's quite okay. It's quite okay. So there can be different realizations, provided it's consistent with Scripture. And one acharya may say this, and the very same generation, acharya may say that. It's not so often, but it can sometimes be like that. And it's not just an impertinent fellow like one of us might say, I don't accept it's that, it's this. That's puffed up. So it's not that Baladev said Vishwanath's wrong. That's impertinent. That's a no-no. He just expressed his realization. Consistently, we look to our predecessor acharyas, particularly in the line of Lord Chaitanya. We look to Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and Jiva Goswami as that's our Supreme Court. And acharyas subsequent to them write consistent with the Supreme Court. And they have the realizations. And they express the realizations. And we respect those realizations as authoritative. But again, it doesn't mean if this is said, then that can't be. I'm going over this for a while because it's important. As we go further in our devotional life, we'll come across things that seem contradictory. And it's quite okay. There's some boundaries. The boundaries are the authority of the Scripture is not questioned. And the authority of Vyas is not questioned because he's the compiler. But then, there's different understandings, even within our own sampradaya, what to speak of between one and another sampradaya, where they have a rendering of Vyasadev's teachings. Let's just say Vedanta Sutra, which is Vyasadev's writing. It's Vyasadev's realization. And as we can say, the Bhagavatam is Vyasadev's realization. So they're not to be questioned. But following all of that, there's variety. It's quite okay. And that's just, from the Vedic tradition. And then there's other worship God in other ways, and then it starts to get broader. One way of saying, in a very broad-minded, liberal way. In one verse in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes 3 categories of people that worship him, and he accepts them as his devotees. Ekatvena, Pataktvena, Bahuda Vishvato Mukham. You familiar with the verse? Ekatvena. They worship the one. It's in Prabhupada's explanation, Ahangra Upasana. They worship themselves. Now Krishna worships himself, but he's the supreme. So what about people that aren't Krishna and worship themselves? Well, they can just think that they're God. That's not a devotee. But they can understand, I am part and parcel. If I can understand myself properly, then I can understand that from which the self comes, the source. And Krishna accepts that person as a devotee. Prataktvena Bahuda is the second one. There's various expansions of Krishna with the demigods. And by worshiping demigods, separate from Krishna, that's not his devotee. But the demigods are representatives of Krishna, and they're carrying some potency of Krishna for service to Krishna, and they're being respected or even worshipped in the sense that they're connected representatives of Krishna. It's something like chapter 10, Bhagavad Gita, the vibhutis, they're representatives of Krishna, the ways to remember Krishna. So respecting the demigods in that sense, as it is intended in the Vedic texts that describe the demigods and what they do and how they're to be worshipped and so forth. The purpose of that is to connect with Krishna. And then the third is the universal form. So there's pantheists, that God is nature, nature is God. That's not that Krishna's devotee. But one who sees in relation to the God, the various features of the material creation, that's Krishna's devotee. The hills are his stacks of bones, the trees are his hairs at his body, the sun and the moon are his 2 eyes. Canto 2, chapter 1. Worship of the universal form. So it has its place. Krishna accepts. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna accepts those 3. They're preliminary. They're not on the topmost stage, but they're preliminary to lead that can potentially. It can lead one off a cliff, but it can also lead one potentially to a worship of the personality of Godhead. Because they're indirect and less than complete, but they're preliminary. So it's nice. That's very broad, embracing of persons who have different dispositions, who aren't evolved enough in consciousness to accept what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, that he's the source of everything. So they have, there's little steps to get to that. position. And Krishna accepts them. No, the consciousness behind each of those three is very important. And how does one get the right consciousness of those three? By association with devotees. Now let's go back to the demigods, or the Lokapalas, the protectors of the directions. They're invested for protection purposes and maintenance purposes. They're invested with some powers. Where do those powers come from? Same thing everything comes from. Same place, from Krishna. So now they're offering back to Krishna because he's having Dwarka being built. So they want to give what they've been given. It's quite natural. They're not territorial, wait a minute, this is mine. They understand it's given to them by Krishna. So Krishna doesn't need it. Just as he can invest them with power, he can invest same power elsewhere without their cooperation. But it's devotion. They're devotees. They want to give. And Krishna accepts. And just like we read, with Vishwakarma, where did the ability for Vishwakarma come from? From Krishna. So Krishna asked him for some service, and he did it the best. He did it better than anything he did in the heavenly realm, because it was for Krishna, because he was empowered to do like that. So what about us? What's the application point for us? We all have some ability. It can be small, but whatever it is, ability, where does it come from? And if we use that ability, not mindful of who it's meant for, it can be, there's some Shakti, some ability. But it doesn't lead to spiritual elevation. It can lead to attraction for the person or the opulence that person carries, and people go, wow. And the world is made of those kinds of things. People that are good at this, people that are good at sports, people that are good at singing, people that are good at whatever they're good at. And not connecting that to the source, one can be enamored. Because the tendency to worship is there. The tendency to look up to somebody who has something is there. Yad yadacharati shreshtas tat tat eve torojana. Everyone. And those that have that shreshta, that opulence, if their consciousness is, this is meant for Krishna, then that has the power of awakening or promoting Krishna bhakti within others who that person interacts with and does their whatever they do. Now there's boundaries of what one can do for Krishna. I mean, a nice example that comes to mind at the moment is George Harrison. At least the description that I've heard so many times. I can't verify because it wasn't there, but the description I've heard many times is George requested Srila Prabhupada to become his initiated disciple. And Prabhupada's reply was, better that you just carry on singing because you can influence people through your singing. Now, logic might say, well, wait a minute. He could have influenced people through his singing as an initiated devotee. Now, why Prabhupada chose to not? He said what he said. He wanted him to use his singing ability to attract people to Krishna, which he did. So that was the service given to him. So whether, leaving the initiation question to the side, the principle is bhakti is passed on by one who's carrying bhakti, and one who is carrying bhakti whatever ability one has a bhakti potency to it, a bhakti shakti. And whatever abilities one has that's not used in Krishna service, that bhakti shakti isn't there. So the demigods, fortunately for them, they're devotees. And, sometimes they forget, but largely they're very devotional. So in other words, there's mix, but largely they're very devotional. So when Krishna is building Dwaraka, it doesn't say that he asked them. He may have asked them or had somebody ask them, but whether somebody asked them or they just did it voluntarily, they're very happy to give whatever they have. And then when Krishna received it, it became, you could say, spiritualized fully. Shuddha. Absolutely pure. Absolutely pure. Because that's Dwaraka. Again, for going back to yesterday, just, the manifesting of Dwaraka, which is an eternal abode of Krishna, using things that come from different places, like the heavenly realm. And wherever are the other ingredients, the gold and the silver and the emeralds and the rubies and the diamonds and the other, wonderful opulences, those are worldly things. Or they are found within this world. So whether it's in the heavenly realm, manifesting something here may have its appearance of being material. However, when it's directly for Krishna's purpose, then it takes on a quality that's not different than Krishna. Here's two examples, and I'm going to end with this. I don't know if any of you have ever wondered, I did, on our altar in front of Jagannath, there's what looks like a Shila. So when I asked, the answer I got was, that's not a Shila, it's Tadiya. Tadiya means paraphernalia of Krishna. So this is from Shankar Pandit, but the explanation given to me was, in a very, very old, ancient Nrsimha temple, this stone was found, or Tadiya. And so, by some arrangement, that paraphernalia of an ancient Nrsimha temple is now on our altar. Because Tadiya is non-different than the Supreme Lord. There's an explanation, this is the last part. There's an explanation in Hari Bhakti Vilas about that which is offered to Krishna becomes Tadiya, or as spiritual as is Krishna. So here's a nice garland that was something material offered to Krishna, and now becomes that which has touched the body of Krishna, or offered to Krishna in that way, becomes non-different, spiritual. The articles on the altar, the paraphernalia for deity worship, it's Tadiya. It's as worshipable as the deity is. As the deity is not wood, stone, or metal, the paraphernalia is not just material, becomes, according to Hari Bhakti Vilas, as worshipable as the personality of Godhead is worshipable. That which directly comes in contact with the body of the Supreme Lord, or used in his service. Or say the same thing, Prabhupada's statement, this temple is not, I heard it personally twice, this temple is not in New York, it's in Vaikuntha. He said the same thing in Los Angeles. This temple is not in Los Angeles, it's in Vaikuntha. So this temple is not in Chicago, it's in Vaikuntha. Welcome, Prabhus, to Vaikuntha. No anxiety, right? The spiritualizing effect, the potency is there. And it has everything to do with how it is seen. So it's going to be experienced differently according to how one sees. Just like seeing the deity, or chanting the holy name, or hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, or serving the devotees, or wearing a garland. Depends on the consciousness behind how we're going to experience that. It doesn't change the reality if we're not experiencing it. The sound of Krishna's name is not different than Krishna, even if we don't realize it. It's absolute. So Dwarka is absolute. And things that are being used to build Dwarka by Vishwakarma and the great graciousness of the demigods, they become fully spiritualized because it's for Krishna's service. No question about it. Every part of it. And then when Krishna was ready, he withdrew it, and that's just fine. The eternal abode doesn't, it can be prakat or aprakat, manifest or not manifest. Just as this world is sometimes manifest and not manifest, similarly the abode may be manifest or not manifest, but the abode is eternal. And when he manifests, it's of a fully spiritual nature. That should be our understanding. Let's see if there's some discussion. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sri Romapada Swami. I'm thinking of Indra as explained, along with all the demigods, they offer their opulences, all these different opulence to Krishna as devotees. And obviously they have such responsible positions in the service of Krishna in the whole creation, in the universe. And naturally they're very qualified devotees. And you're thinking in the case of Indra, who king of heaven with all the qualifications and going through all these different, throughout the presence of Krishna, all these different situations in which he makes a mistake, he gets corrected, and then now we're going to see that even after offering things to Krishna, then later there is this dispute with the Parijata tree. Although he offered one, what's the problem of taking another one? So this situation of Krishna reciprocating with his devotee that is consistently being influenced. In one sense, you mentioned also that there's a tendency when one's become in touch with opulence and things like that, one can get attracted to those type of opulences. So
what's the punchline?
Krishna, these dealings of Krishna with being able to maintain, it's not that he gets rid of Indra because obviously
he gets rid of what?
Get rid of Indra because of his disqualification, of his consistent mistakes. But he maintains him there. And so in one sense, Krishna is showing some consistent also sort of, tolerance towards, acceptance, or, he maintains Indra in that position. It's not that, he's disqualified. So the question is appreciating their appreciation of Krishna's kindness tolerance and working with, with his devotees in so many ways, even when they're making consistent mistakes. So just comment on that and your thoughts on this.
Krishna is very kind. And his kindness is shown in different ways at different times. But the consistent is Krishna is very kind. In different ways at different times. He shows his kindness. Sometimes and sometimes and sometimes. But Krishna is very kind. And he recognizes Indra, just because you're pointing to Indra. He's a devotee. And there's tendency, because of being influenced by his opulence, etc., to do things that one shouldn't do, or things that are even abominable. But he's consistent with Bhagavad Gita's, Krishna's words. He's Krishna's devotee, and Krishna considers him sadhu, and Krishna corrects him as needed. That's it. Kshipram bhavati dharmatma. He corrects him.
I wanted to just, now that I'm thinking, sorry, Guru Maharaj, just to complete.
Keep it short.
Yeah. Us, as servants of Krishna, trying to represent Krishna's way of dealing with devotees. Sometimes we fail so much in dealing with devotees in the same way that Krishna does.
Yeah, it's true. We fail often. But we're not Krishna either. Meaning, he's flawless, but also he has all potency. When he does what he does, it has all potency. We don't have all potency. Like, our founder Acharya. We can't do as Prabhupada did because we don't have that potency that Prabhupada had. So we have to act within our capacity, aside from making mistakes. We have to acknowledge we have a different capacity. Is there anything else?
Guru Maharaj, I'm wondering if you would be willing to comment on the apparent, or on what seems to be an apparent contradiction. On the one hand, we know that Krishna consciousness is a science, meaning that if we apply ourselves to the process, the results are replicable.
Yes.
Science has a mechanistic connotation to it.
What?
Science has a mechanistic connotation to it.
Yeah, that's material science, has a mechanistic perspective.
On the other hand, we know that the realm of bhakti is a realm of rasa and spontaneity. The spiritual world is ruled by love, not by laws. And Krishna is not bound to reciprocate with any one of us according to a set algorithm. So how do we understand Krishna consciousness as a science, and yet there's just such a ambiguous...
Let's go back to how Srila Prabhupada identified what science means. I'm sure you've heard. Science, he equates to Vigyan. There's theory, but there's also application of theory. And the application of theory is an essential part of science. So the application of theory and the science-ness of Krishna consciousness is what, as you described, it's not mechanistic. At the same time, there are vidhis that are given, so the rules and regulations of sadhana are to be followed. There are persons who say, no, 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 no need. Just be spontaneous. There are people that say that. And they're popular. So, but Krishna gives vidhis for sadhana bhakti. But at the same time, that's not the essence. The essence is something else. But it doesn't mean trash the vidhis. So the law and love don't clash. Particularly, so your question is related to Subal's question or comment. That is, Krishna can adjust things, no problem. But he knows when to adjust things, and he has the power to correct things when he adjusts things. We don't have that power. So so it depends where we are in our spiritual evolution. When can vidhis be adjusted? And when they can't. It has a lot to do with, for our own personal lives, has a lot to do with the science of Krishna consciousness, that is, the love aspect of our relationship with Krishna. And if that's not there, then it falls in a different category. So where to apply law and when to apply love, that's for a qualified person. But we don't just trash law, we don't just trash love. How to apply the two requires Krishna consciousness. Yes.
I was sort of generalizing or making a generalization in my own mind that the demigods appear to be very attuned to some magnificent feat that Krishna is performing. So there's many occasions where one hears that they're showering petals from the heavenly planets when Krishna's killed demons. But the interesting thing in this particular verse is it's so much deeper, because what they're actually offering is, the words used was their powers of control. So I was truly appreciating the demigods a great deal, just from the depth of what's been offered. Now, of course, understanding, as you pointed out, that it's coming from their acknowledgement of where those powers had come from. But at any rate, it seems very wonderful, their particular action in these verses that were covered today.
First, a comment. Sound system. We had a conversation yesterday for half an hour. I could understand everything she said through the phone. Through the speaker system, 30, 40%. I'm looking at Sabal because, I made a comment like this in central New Jersey. And I asked the people in the audience, do you understand everything? And, so what they decided to do in central New Jersey is they're going to completely re-gut, the sound system and put in a new sound system. Now, I don't know if we have the capacity to do that here, and I don't know if it's not going to work either. But the acoustics in this room, for me, so. Well, I don't know if anybody else has the problem that I have, and I commonly say, It is a problem. Because I commonly say, look, I'm getting old and I'm hard of hearing, so please help me, be kind. But it's a sound system because I can understand everything she says. except through this sound system. So can you help me understand what she said, Subal? You want to say it again?
Subal said to try again. So I'll look very directly and try.
Well, the part that you're making a comment, not so much asking a question. And the comment is, as far as I gathered, the 30%, 40%, is they're just simply acknowledging that they've received something from Krishna and they're offering it back to Krishna. And that's, the essence of what your comment that you made. Yes?
Yes, and I was I suppose, appreciating the depth of the offering, because in so many other situations, one's just hearing that they're showering petals from the heavenly planets when Krishna performs a great feat.
Help?
She says that the depth of the offering
Depth.
is quite wonderful in this situation that they're offering all the powers that they have received.
Yes.
They have powers to control.
Yeah. They don't lose their power to control by making that offering. Rather, their power to control increases by making that offering. They're not relinquishing what they have. They're offering what they have, and it does not, 1 minus 1 is 1. That's also your point. Okay, very good. Anyone else in the room that is yet to speak, would like to say? Okay, Sri Radhika.
Guru Maharaj, as I continue to study empathic communication, one of the concepts I've become very interested in is
One of the concepts of?
One of the concepts that I've become very interested in is
Yeah.
the concept of healthy boundaries and examples of that from our scripture, because I understand that healthy relationships are based on healthy boundaries. So yesterday evening in the class, you mentioned Maharaj Ambarish, and when you describe that particular instance, I've often heard you talk about how his mind didn't move, his feet didn't move, even though he was being attacked. And
Doesn't happen. It's not worldly.
yes.
You don't have to think to protect. Something comes flying at you don't have to think. Your hands go up.
Yes.
His hand didn't go up. His mind didn't move. It's otherworldly.
And
He's a king. He's Kshatriya. Nothing. He didn't fake it. Go ahead.
And knowing too that he was the king of the world, I can imagine that there were other instances in his life where there might have been a need to create healthy boundaries, especially when perhaps the king was protecting the citizens. I'm interested if there are any places in our scriptures where there's more description of more description of Maharaj Ambarish and how he ruled the world.
I invite you. Here's what I can do for you. My magical computer has commentaries. So I'll cut and paste, if I can, that whole section, and you can read it rather than my researching. The whole section of the Maharaj Ambarish and how he ruled. And then there's an additional something that can be done. And the additional something that can be done is when people that really like to research a particular topic, they take certain verses and enter it into, a computer program here, a folio, and then just the verse number. And then wherever our acharyas speak about that verse, aside from this, section of the Bhagavatam, it pops up. How's that?
Yes, good.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj, for the class.
Speak clearly.
In the translation of 54, it says that Lord Indra brought Sri Krishna the Sadrama assembly hall, standing within which a mortal man is not subject to the laws of mortality.
Yeah,
What does
okay.
that mean?
Okay, you want an explanation? What does that mean?
Yeah.
I did it, but I'll do it again. There's a potency invested in that hall that people will live a long life. Those who enter that chamber will live a long life. Now, one way of saying that they will live a long life is to say they'll live a long life. Another way is to saying they'll surpass the law of mortality. Surpass the law of mortality might indicate an absolute, in their self-same body they become eternal. So, leaving that over to the side, that's not what happens. The body is not eternal. Even the demigods, their bodies are perishable. So you take what may be the literal meaning, and now you have to go to a secondary meaning. It's a Sanskrit rule. You look at the primary meaning, the principal meaning. And if it just doesn't work, then you have to look at a secondary meaning. The secondary meaning is they live a long life. As if mortality doesn't rule in their life. That's the secondary meaning. And that's the meaning one has to take, because you don't become eternal in the heavenly planets, whatever assembly hall you go to. Bodies are perishable. So you have to take a secondary meaning. That answer? It's like, Amara, deathless. The demigods are sometimes use that adjective to describe them because they live such a long life. But their bodies are perishable. Same. Primary, secondary meanings. Now Krishna is literally deathless. The eternal, those who have spiritual forms, those spiritual forms are not annihilated. They're literally deathless. They're not born either. But anything that's born dies. And it's not just by going into an assembly hall. Your body will never perish. It's not the fact. Not a correct understanding of the term. Okay? Good. Srila Prabhupada ki